I've had a lot of people ask me, hey, can you do a video about the Darkland? And it really annoys me. No, not the question, but rather that as much as I would love to do a video about the Darkland, there's hardly any real information about it. The script would be 2 paragraphs maximum, and the video might last 2 minutes, and half of that would be an intro and an outro. But in this video, we're still going to talk about the Darkland, and everything else beyond that famous map of Middle-earth. Any fan of the Lord of the Rings is probably reasonably familiar with the map that is currently on screen. Maybe not the tiny details, but they have a rough idea of the location and names of certain places. While we always refer to this map as a map of Middle-earth, in reality, Middle-earth is a massive continent comparable to Eurasia and Africa, and what we see on the map here is just the northwestern part of Middle-earth. There's a whole lot of places and people beyond the edges of the map, mainly in the south and east, that we know almost nothing about. So what does Middle-earth actually look like? If you've googled a map of Arda before, you've probably come across a few different versions. The one I have on screen right now is the infamous David Day Lung map. There's nothing I could say about this map that hasn't already been said, so the less time I spend on it, the better. The next map is from Middle-earth Role-Playing, or MERP. Very detailed, a cool map, but unfortunately completely non-canon. And then there's this map, similar to the MERP map, but not quite as detailed, and unfortunately also non-canon. Rather unfortunately, Tolkien only drew 2 proper world maps. Well, he actually drew 5, but the first 3 are actually really only diagrams. The one I have on screen right now is Ambercantar 4. It depicts the world before the War for the Sake of the Elves, which completely reshaped the world. As you can see, we have 3 continents, Aman in the west, where one can find Valinor, in the middle is obviously Middle-earth, and to the east we have a mysterious land known as the Lands of the Sun. I'm not going to focus on Valinor because we already have maps of Valinor, but I am going to talk about Middle-earth and the Lands of the Sun. Although this map doesn't look anything like the way the world looked in the Third Age, we can see some familiar landmarks. In the north are the Iron Mountains, where Morgoth made his fortresses, but also the Blue Mountains, the very same Blue Mountains that appear on a localized map of Middle-earth. We also have the Red Mountains, Oricani, which also still existed in the Third Age, and may have been home to some of the Dwarven clans of the east. We can also see the rough locations of Cuivianen and Hildorian, the places of awakening for elves and men respectively. And of course, there's the giant seas of Helkar and Ringil, which were created when Morgoth destroyed the 2 lamps. We also have plenty of unfamiliar landmarks, mostly in the form of mountain ranges. In the centre of Middle-earth, we have the Mountains of the Wind, of which we know absolutely nothing about. And further to the south, we have the Grey Mountains and the Yellow Mountains. Obviously, the Grey Mountains here are not the same as the Grey Mountains that appear in the north of our localised map of Middle-earth. And in the Lands of the Sun, we have the mountains, or the Walls of the Sun. I really do like that name, the Walls of the Sun. However, the world changed quite dramatically after the Valar and Morgoth went to war. This leads us to Ambercantar 5. Despite the less than stellar quality, you can see that the world is quite different. Here you can see the rough shape of Middle-earth. It does look like Eurasia and Africa, and you can see where our fan-made maps, especially the last one, got their ideas from. You can also see that there is a completely new continent. Middle-earth has been split in 2, the Sea of Ringil has been emptied, and now we have the Darkland in the southeast, reminiscent of Australia and Antarctica. The Lands of the Sun appear to have remained much the same. But while we have some new places, we have some old places that didn't make it into the new map. You might notice that only 4 of the 6 large mountain ranges in Ambercantar 4 made it to Ambercantar 5. The Yellow Mountains and the Mountains of the Wind are completely gone. If we compare their location across maps, it seems that both ranges might have been destroyed when Middle-earth and the Darkland were separated from each other. It's also possible that those mountains might have ended up on the Darkland, or they could be in the same place and were simply not added to the map. After all, you can see that even in Ambercantar 5, the massive Misty Mountains are still absent, despite the fact they definitely existed at the time. Now, I don't want to keep you looking at Ambercantar 5 because I value the eyesight of my subscribers. So we're going to jump across to Karen Wynne Fonstad's maps from the Atlas of Middle-earth. While these are some of the best maps we have, they aren't entirely without fault. Fonstad did make some mistakes and embellishments, and unfortunately, the Atlas was published before the History of Middle-earth books were published, which gave us new information. For example, in this map of the First Age, Mordor and the Sea of Rhûn don't exist, but we now know both these places did exist in the First Age. Fonstad also places rivers, forests, and islands. With the exception of the Wildwood, none of these places are entirely canon. Let's jump to the Second Age, because it's the last age where we mostly know what the world looked like. You can see our localized map of Middle-earth, and how it roughly compares to the rest of Middle-earth. While it's absolutely not a small portion of the map, you can still see that Rhûn and Harad are much larger. It makes sense as to why, even during the War of the Ring, the Gondorians were encountering new types of Easterlings and Southrons that they had never seen before. So let's talk about some of the places on the map. First, let's talk about Harad. While what we see of Harad is mostly desert, we are told that great jungles exist far to the south, and given the size of the land, there would likely be plenty of other biomes too, especially as Harad continued much further to the south of where a hypothetical equator would be. We can also see the presumed continued existence of the Grey Mountains, one of the large mountain ranges that Tolkien originally drew. I say presumed because no maps exist of it beyond the First Age. It's possible that they were destroyed during the cataclysm that sunk Beleriand, but there's nothing that says that it was. You can see Umbar, which was the northernmost base of the King's Men Númenóreans. I say northernmost because the Númenóreans colonized the coastline of Harad quite extensively, many of these becoming the Black Númenórean realms that would exist at the start of the Third Age. However, the interior was usually considered to be Sauron's domain. Next, let's talk about Rhûn. You'll notice the absence of the large Sea of Helcar. In reality, we don't know what happened to the Sea of Helcar. It may have still existed in the Second and Third Age, perhaps in a shrunken form. While the Rhûn that we see mostly appears to be steppe and barren plains, like Harad, it's a large place and very likely had a wide variety of landscapes. In the east, the massive Oricani dominates the map, and beneath it is a place known as the Wildwood, where elves wandered during the dawn of their existence. Although never explicitly confirmed, it's likely that Oricani contain the domains of at least some of the 4 eastern dwarven clans, and the Wildwood, among other places, may have been home to Avaran elves, those elves who never went west. Unlike Harad, Rhûn received very minimal Númenórean influence, and although they very likely visited the eastern coast of Middle-earth, Rhûn was where Sauron had the most influence, and it's where he hid until he moved to Dol Guldur as the Necromancer. Next, let's talk about the Lands of the Sun, the eastern continent which acts like a mirror to Aman. It even has a similar mountain range, the Walls of the Sun, of which the tallest mountain is called Kalorme. All descriptions of the Lands of the Sun indicate that it seems like a place that was unfinished or neglected by the Valar. One of its names is the Burnt Land of the Sun, suggesting that at the very least, it's a hot desert, and at the most, it's entirely uninhabitable. The East Sea is also described as dark, silent, and empty, rather haunting really. The Númenóreans visited these lands, but probably didn't make any permanent bases. However, these lands weren't completely pointless. It's said that on the eastern side of the Lands of the Sun, Aule and Ulmo built great havens for the sun and moon. Whether they were used is unknown. And if you've been waiting, let's talk about the Darkland. We don't know very much about it at all, or if anyone actually lived there. We know that it was visited by Númenórean sailors who rounded the southern tip of Harad and made their way to the Inner Sea, although we don't know if they made any permanent bases there. It's also said that Ungoliant eventually made her way to the forgotten south of the world, so it's possible she ended up in the Darkland. If that's the case, that's a great reason not to go there. It's also theorized that some of the men who served Morgoth also fled there, as they are also described as fleeing far to the south, but whether this meant the Darkland or simply the south of Middle-earth is unknown. And, unfortunately, that's about all we know about the Darkland. So is this how Arda looks during the Third Age? No. During the downfall of Numenor, Iluvatar once again completely reshaped the world. The world was made round, Numenor sunk into the abyss. There's also this line from the Lost Road, for Iluvatar cast back the great seas west of Middle-earth and the empty lands east of it, and new lands and new seas were made, and the world was diminished, for Valinor and Eressëa were taken from it into the realm of hidden things. So when the world was made round, new lands and seas were made to make up for the fact that Aman and Valinor had been removed from the physical circles of the world. Dunedain sailors actually reached these new lands and reported back that one could still die there, suggesting that they might have stayed a while or that someone on the crew might have been quite old. We also know that they were successful in completing a circumnavigation, a huge achievement in our world, but to the Dunedain, it was disappointing because it confirmed that they could definitely not reach Valinor. But the part of the line where Iluvatar casts back the empty lands east of Middle-earth is also of interest. The phrase cast back usually refers to dragging something back or returning it to its original location. This might indicate that lands of the sun, and possibly even the dark lands, were also removed from the circles of the world, and that new lands replaced them. If those lands were removed, it would probably imply that they were both uninhabited, unless Iluvatar was totally fine with yeeting a huge amount of totally innocent people from the circles of the world. This could mean that, outside of Middle-earth itself, our map of Arda in the Third Age might be entirely unrecognizable compared to anything Tolkien originally drew. Considering Middle-earth is a mythological history of our own world, it might be that these new lands, the ones that replaced Aman in the west, looked much more like the Americas. Certainly, by the time of the 6th, or possibly as early as the 5th Age, Arda looked a lot like our own Earth. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, or at least found it interesting. I actually did a similar video to this about 3 years ago, but whereas that video focused more on how the map actually changed, I wanted this video to focus more on the description of some of the lands themselves. If you want to see it, I've added it to the end screen here so that you don't have to scroll your way to the depths of my channel. Anyway, cheers, farewell, and remember, if you want that tourism money, don't call something the Dark Land.